Hey everyone, it's Shawn. Welcome to another edition of Best in Events. We're going to be talking about the future of events. Obviously, it's been a while since we did a show. There's been a big shift. Speaker Thom Singer is joining us. He's been all over this industry. He's starting to re-engage. He's back out on the road. And then my regular co-host, Deirdre Watson, will be joining us in a minute too. First, I'm going to bring up Thom and say hi to Thom. How you doing, man? Good to see you.
I'm doing great. How are you, Shawn?
I'm doing excellent. Excellent. So, tell me, I mean, what are you seeing right now? I mean, the world has shifted a lot. You said you're talking to some speakers and some people are starting to re-engage.
Yeah, I mean, it's, everybody you talk to has sort of a different story, no matter who they are, no matter what industry. And, if you talk to people who had professional jobs, they're like, what? We had to move home. The worst part of the whole thing was, maybe they had to, work with their kids doing, classroom in the next room. But for those of us who worked in the meetings business, everything came to a halt, 16 months ago. And we're starting to see the little tricklings that things are coming back. And I'm pretty bullish about 2022 and 2023 when it comes to the live in-person meeting world.
Yep. So you're starting to step out there a little bit. You're talking to some meeting planners, some event organizers. What are they starting to tell you? I mean, what are they saying? It sounds like 2022, it sounds like a lot of them are at least giving serious thought to kicking things back off again.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's hungry to get back to doing events. A lot of people really liked virtual. For some people, it worked really well for their lifestyle, both as an attendee and as a speaker. But I think, the live meeting business, it's still about sort of the overall experience of being there in person. And I think a lot of planners, as much as they pivoted and were able to do some really interesting things virtually, they want to plan a meeting at a facility, bring people together, and have that human connection piece tied in. We proved we can deliver really good content through online vehicles and through platforms. But for most people, not everybody, every now and then someone goes, no, Thom, I've become a better networker because I don't have to actually see people, and so some people, this worked out great. For most of us, a lot of relationships went cold. We haven't seen the people in our industries. And so we've got to sort of retool and get out there. And so I think it's going to take us a year or so, but I think the meetings business in 2023 is going to be bigger than it ever has been.
Yep. Wow. All right, Deirdre, what are you seeing up there?
Yeah, you know what? I'm in Canada, so we're a whole different world up here. Our border is still closed, and will be until the end of July. I can't wait to get out there again. I recently moved due to COVID, and I'm now in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, which is right across from Detroit. I have a lot of contacts, a lot of connections in the U.S. Most of my business that I did was for Canadian clients that had U.S. subsidiaries. And one thing that we talked about when we first started doing Best in Events, Thom, was how big conferences would be. And as a speaker, what are you seeing for 2022 in regards to the audience size that you might be dealing with in speaking engagements?
So I think the juries are still out, right? I think for the rest of this year, for 2021, we're definitely seeing smaller conferences. I'm going to be attending the National Speakers Association conference. It's usually about 1,800 people. This year, it's capped at 600, and they've only sold about 500 of the tickets. So I think that we're seeing a lot of events that were used to being one size being smaller this year because some people aren't ready to travel for a lot of different reasons. But I think that part of what has made the business work, especially for people who are like really high-end speakers as far as their fees, if you're used to getting a fee that is $25,000 and they would have, 5,000 people at the conference, if they have 500 people at the conference, they now don't have the same budget to have the celebrity speaker. So I'm starting to hear from some organizations who never hired someone who wasn't famous, who are now, because of where my fee structure is, they want to have a conversation because they don't have $25,000 if they're only going to have 500 or 600 people at their event. So I think there's just going to be a lot of shifts, but I think in the long run, come 2023, I think events are going to get back to whatever size the event organizer wants the events to be, and whatever the venue can handle.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about kind of the hybrid. One of our viewers said they love the hybrid. Hybrid's obviously a way you can up the numbers. In fact, we heard a couple anecdotal stories when we're doing best in events right when the pandemic first broke out. That some conferences actually got bigger by going online, right? They had a set number of people they're going to bring in, and they said, "Oh, we can't do it in person. Let's go online." They doubled up their marketing efforts, and they 10x the event by going online. And I think a lot of people are thinking that the hybrid thing is going to be more of a long-term trend now. So what's your thoughts on that, Thom?
Well, I think that yes and no. So it's interesting. When I look at the events that really brought in a lot more people, it was because you suddenly had a worldwide audience that could come in. And a lot of it had to do with what industry it was in. Was it an industry where they needed to get their continuing education credits? I talked to one person who usually had about 600 people, and they had 4,000 people at their virtual event. But it was the only way people could get the credits to renew their professional license, because everything else was not happening. So, it wasn't that they magically had more people. They were the only place that someone, this time last year could get those credits. So they exploded because they were able to offer it digitally. I talked to some events who had 2,000 or 3,000 people who they went way down because they didn't lower their price enough. I think that humans in general, if you're used to paying $1,000 to go to a conference, you may not be willing to spend $1,000 to sit in your living room and watch it if you're not getting those continuing education credits or some other payoff. So I think it's on an event by event basis where this is going to go. The big problem that I'm hearing from a lot of meeting planners is to do hybrid well, it's really expensive. And so it's a problem because their budget doesn't allow them to do the live conference and the virtual conference with all the bells and whistles. So I think we're going to have to figure out sort of that happy medium. I also talked to one client who they're like, nope, we're only doing in person. And if people can't come, they don't come. So I think it's the industry, the purpose of the conference has a lot to do with it. What they're offering, what you get has a lot to do with it. So I don't think there's going to be a one size fits all. I do believe that in many cases, we're going to see some sort of an offering for hybrid where we hadn't seen that before the pandemic.
Yep. Deirdre, let's see if your mic's working a little better here.
Okay.
Oh,
Can
much
you hear
better.
me now better? Okay.
Much better.
Tom, and hybrid, I've been doing hybrid for years.
Me too.
Because I worked for a software company, and that's what we did. We did hybrid, and because we'd bring in a speaker from Austin or a speaker from someplace else in the US, and so I've experienced a hybrid, and of course the technical difficulties that hybrid can bring you, and here we are, we're online, and I've got technical difficulties today. But what are and we talked about budgets, and are the budgets for speakers changing? Because now you're dealing with a live, but you're also dealing with a hybrid, and it's much more difficult to engage on a hybrid level or on a virtual level than it is an in-person level.
So I don't know if it's more difficult. I definitely think it's different. And not every speaker is trained or experienced yet in doing both. We very quickly got up to speed in this business on doing virtual. I think most speakers weren't accustomed to doing virtual in March a year ago, but by June and July, everybody had kind of figured it out. People had lights, they had, their own little studio area set up in their house, whatever their choice was to do that. But now that we go back to presenting in person, but with this broadcast, there's just some things you have to do differently. So about 8 years ago, my friend Eliz Green and I started a program called the Conference Talk Show, because she and I believed wholeheartedly that hybrid was going to be the future, like starting 8 years ago, once we had the streaming capability down. So we created a product where for the broadcast, she and I would create sort of a talk show, like Live with Kelly and Ryan in the morning, or The View, or something like that. And we created this whole concept where it was a separate set of masters of ceremony and hosts for the virtual audience, then the person who was hosting and being the MC on the main stage. And then we would do a whole bunch of interviews with the speakers and things like that. So I started doing this 8 years ago. The problem was meeting planners, while they liked the idea and they loved the interview format, the talk show style, it wasn't cheap to have the technology in place to be able to broadcast it well. And then paying for 2 co-hosts was not cheap. So we did a bunch of them as like a test and everybody loved it. And then we said, this is what it cost. We only did a handful of them over the years. And so I think one of the problems is nobody knows where the budgets are going to fall until they know where their sponsors are, until they know how many people are coming. You know, it's great to throw a hybrid event, but if people aren't signing up to be there in person or aren't signing up to be there online, then you're going to have a lopsided thing. And it's the one that's not getting enough people is going to eat a lot of the budget. So I think we're going to have some growing pains as we figure this out over the next 2 years.
Yeah, and I gotta say, Thom, I mean, I think you were ahead of your time, but you know, how awkward is it when you're attending a virtual event? They've kind of just got the camera facing the stage and people are walking back and forth. You could hear people are filing in the room, and that's, you know, that's time you expect at a conference. You might be saying hi to your friend or grabbing a drink or getting ready to settle in. But when you're sitting at home at your desk and you're just watching an empty stage, it's kind of it's awkward.
So that's what Eliz and I realized 8 years ago was that most people who were broadcasting, when they would go to a coffee break or lunch, they would just put up a slide that said back in an hour. And you would lose a lot of people. So that's when we started filling that time with talk show style interviews. And what's great is that the sponsors love it because you can sit down if you have a good interviewer and get the sponsor not just to do a sales pitch, but to talk about why they're involved in the industry, why they founded the company, what benefits their clients get. And the people at home like it. They really eat it up because they're getting something the in-person audience doesn't have. So your FOMO, your fear of missing out because you're in your kitchen at home, is lessened because you're getting extra content that the people live aren't getting. And so you're filling those downtimes. But again, it takes a lot of coordination. The meeting planners I'm talking to are, whether they're experienced in doing hybrid or they're just learning, it's like planning 2 simultaneous events. And they're saying it's like having 2 totally separate budgets.
I can feel that, right? I mean, it makes sense because you do have that element, right? You have different audiences, different needs, and then, you may use some of the programming, but it's a different set of needs. Deirdre, back to you.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that people don't realize with the hybrid event and the virtual component of it is that you are at the mercy of technology. So you've got to ensure that you've got the proper bandwidth, especially if you're bringing in a speaker. And making sure that prior to the event, your speaker has everything that they need and are trained properly in doing a virtual speaking engagement. And Thom, maybe you can speak to that as a professional who does both. What are your suggestions to speakers out there and even planners on making sure their speakers have all the right tools that they need?
Well, like I said, I think we learned really quickly in 2020 how to do this. I think most speakers who wanted to work virtually, not everybody did. There's a lot of speakers who said, I just took 15 months off. I'm waiting for the live stages because they didn't sign up to be in this business, to sit in the corner of a room and look at a little camera and just talk. Part of being a speaker, if you're good, is the engagement with the audience. It's the interaction. It's that. And some people were able to use that with chat rooms and the way they set up their stuff. And it didn't vibe for other people. However, when we moved to this world of hybrid, now the speakers who've set up these great studios in their house with our lighting and our cameras, we're not bringing that with us. We're for the hybrid in many cases, you're live as a speaker, you're live with the in-person audience, but you're being broadcast. The thing you have to remember is you have to engage that at-home audience. There comes a time in your speech where you have to talk to the camera and you have to address the at-home audience. But I was at a conference where it was a small live audience and a large at-home audience, and it was totally lame to be in the room because all they did was stand on a spot and stare at the camera and talk to the at-home audience. And so I was taking notes saying, okay, when you do a hybrid and you know you're being broadcast and you have live people in the room, you can't favor one audience over the other. In most cases, I think it's that in-person audience that's going to be the most favored audience. And then the at-home audience is going to feel like they're just watching, some sort of lame broadcast. So I think you have to start thinking about how do we engage them? If you're doing a thing with the audience where you're going to have them at their tables talk about a subject, you have to be able to get them into either breakout rooms or in their chat room to be able to share with each other. So as a speaker, to be interactive, you now need to have two activities that are happening simultaneously, because otherwise the at-home audience is, who do I get to talk to? My cat?
Right. Yeah, and I did a workshop not too long ago where they actually did a great job with it, right? They had a Zoom, they had breakout rooms, they tossed you in and out of breakout rooms. It was a little awkward waiting for it, but it kind of worked. Yeah, but you talk about an interesting challenge, right? I mean, eye contact. I remember when I was in college and I had no intentions of being a speaker, but I took a speaking course, and the teacher was like, my dog can tell when I'm making eye contact with him, right? And I'm like, I just filed that away. But there is something special about being in person, right? You look across the room and there's always a handful of people in your audience that are highly engaged, and they're nodding their heads and they're kind of, maybe answering your questions. And that's very hard to replicate online.
Oh, it's really hard. And one of the things I do if I'm on a fully virtual type situation is I can't be reading the chat room while I'm speaking. So like right now, we're all on video together, but in order for the people who are watching, I have to be staring at the camera, and my camera happens to be at the right level to be able to be broadcast, but my laptop sits a little lower because I do work at this laptop. So it sits a little lower. Now, if I spent the whole time staring at Shawn's face, you would see me, like I'm looking at Shawn right now, but it looks awkward if you're the at-home audience. So while I can give eye contact, it's really hard to get. Now, I've seen some speakers who've mounted their camera right in the middle of their display screen so that the faces are all around where the camera is. I haven't done that. That's more effort than I've put in. But even so, if the faces are around, you still kind of have to be doing this to see the faces. So I think it's a problem that you can't ever replicate being in the same room. So what I do is if I'm fully virtual, I just talk about it. I say, look, if we were together, if I said something, I could see you in the room nod like, yes, Thom. Oh, yeah. Or if I said something and you were in disagreement, I could see you cross your arms and go, no. And then I can play that into my speech. If I see somebody look like they disagree, I'll stop and go, well, Deidre, you look like you disagree. And I make it super interactive. So I can't do that in virtual. So what I do is I tell them, here's the code for the chat room. Because if they're typing a lot in the chat room, I can't read, or again, my eyes are down reading the chat room. So I tell them use an exclamation point, excuse me, if you're in total agreement. If you would be nodding your head going, yeah, Thom, just put in a couple exclamation points. If you think I'm wrong, you disagree, it doesn't work that way for your company, use the number 2, because you're basically saying, Thom, you just went number 2. Now in the chat, I can see exclamation points or number 2s. And for the record, I don't get very many number 2s. But if somebody puts a 2 down and I see it go by, I'll say, wait a minute, I just saw a 2 in the chat room. Shawn, turn on your microphone and tell me what you disagreed with. And then I can make it interactive. So on a fully virtual one, that's great. But if I'm on a big stage speaking, I can't see the chat room. I can't know what's going on. So I have to have other ways to do it. And part of it is just being aware that you have 2 masters in 2 audiences that you have to serve.
Yeah, it just puts a speaker in a very tricky spot, Deirdre.
Yeah, and I haven't seen Shawn speak, but Thom, I've seen you speak, and Thom, you're a traveler. Like, you travel the stage. You're not necessarily someone who's going to stand still. I'm more of like I travel if I'm doing a presentation as well, because that engages the audience. So, in speaking to that, what do you recommend to event planners in regards to when they're booking a keynote or something, and it is going to be a hybrid situation? What do you recommend? Because if you're a traveler, keynote traveler, you're not going to stand by a podium and look at a camera all the time.
So this is
comfortable for you.
Oh no, I am definitely. I haven't heard the term traveler, but I travel all over the stage. I'm a walker. I'm a pacer. And I learned that if you're going to make a point, you walk to the edge of the stage. If you're being more dramatic, you move back a little bit. So one of the things that I've seen now is you have to be really engaged with the AV crew about how far can I go? Can I have markers on the stage? If it's a black floor stage, can I have some white tape so that I know where my marks are going to be? And then I let the AV team know that, hey, at this point in my speech, I'm going to walk all the way down to the edge of the thing. Can you catch me if I'm all the way to the left? Because you've got to make sure that camera can get you for the at-home setting. So you have to be a little bit more choreographed when you're in a hybrid situation. The other thing I learned during this whole year of doing virtual is one of the things I did in 2020 is my friend Eliz and I were chosen by the National Speakers Association to be the moderators, to run a talk show, if you would, for what would have been all the breakout sessions for the 2020 last year National Speakers Association conference, because they couldn't run 25 breakout sessions in a virtual setting when they did their 3 days of their conference. So everything was going to be main stage. But before the pandemic, they had already chosen 25 people who were great to be the breakout speakers. So we ran them from May to July, every Monday and Thursday. And we did it like interviews. And we had 4 different formats. There was the long speech, short interview. There was the short speech, long interview. There was the entirely interactive interview where the whole thing was just like they sat down, with us and we talked to them. And then there was the video recording with the speaker, pre-record with the speaker live in chat at that time. So we had 4 different formats that we ran for 25 different sessions. And what I learned as a speaker is I will never again look at the sound check as something like, why do I have to do a sound check? I learned it's not about me as the speaker. It's about all the other players, the meeting planner, the AV people, the camera people. I mean, everybody. The use of that walkthrough is more important when you're going to be broadcasting than you've ever imagined. So if you're a speaker, you can't blow off your sound check, and you can't just think, well, they're going to clip a microphone on me, I'll be fine. No, you have to be super communicative with everybody to make sure that they know what your plans are and that your plans work for the broadcast.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it brings up an important point. I mean, you talked about the limitations of video. You may have to make some compromises on your speech, and the same with the audio, right? Depending on what you're doing in person, depending on the size of your audience. I mean, sometimes you can drop your voice down real low. You may or may not get it picked up on a hybrid thing, right? So it's a lot of thought from the speaker standpoint. And I guess the question becomes from a meeting planner standpoint, Deirdre, is how do you make these compromises, right? Because I think the theme that's coming out today is when you do a dual event, you're compromising on both ends. And is it worth it?
And I take a really good look at this because my background is theater. And the tech run is extremely important. But one of Thom's notes was know your mark. And by doing that tech run previous, and most of my events, we always take the day before and do the tech run with every single speaker if they're on site at that time. Some speakers, of course, don't. Your last minute, but we'll have someone do that tech run for them. But it's extremely important because you are dealing with 2 different entities. It's almost like a live television show that's going to tape.
Absolutely. Well, it's exactly like that, or like the NFL. The NFL has different people who work on the experience for the people in the stadium than people who work on the experience for the TV audience, and that's really what it's. That's really what this is becoming, is 2 entirely separate audiences that need to be thought of, considered. And I think the day of the speaker flying in, coming in, getting mic'd up, walking on stage, giving a speech, and then going to the airport. I think if you're a speaker and your greatest skill is you can get to the airport a half hour after saying thank you very much, I think those days are over. I think you need to be there early, not just for the check, but to be part of the community. And I think they need you there afterwards for interviews. If they are doing a hybrid event, maybe they want the speaker, during the lunch hour to go to the studio and do a broadcast. So I don't think it's just, a sage on the stage for 45 minutes anymore. I think you have to be engaged before, during, and after.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of that model, because I think that's so much deeper in the relationship. And I think, as we go back, I'm with you, Thom. I think a lot of people in the audience are going to say, we're coming back because we want that whole experience, right? I mean, if I just wanted to hear somebody talk, I could listen to a podcast. I could watch it virtually. I want the experience. I want to run into people in the hallway. I want to have that 5-minute conversation off the record where I ask my question or whatever. One of the things you've kind of alluded to here a lot, Thom, I'd like to dive a little deeper on is, What's the relationship with the meeting planner, right? So you're planning to go somewhere and speak. I mean, there's all these different balancing issues we've talked about and all. What do you recommend as far as the relationship there to kind of get to the best possible outcome, balancing the needs of the audience with the folks that are putting the event together?
So part of my work is, and like 15% of my work is as a master of ceremonies. And so that's a little bit of a different role than being the keynote speaker. And what I have found is when I'm the master of ceremonies, I actually become part of their planning committee. Usually if I'm hired 3 to 6 months or more out from the event, I have to participate in a lot of those planning meetings and things that happen. And I think as a speaker, we need to do that too. Even if we're not part of the whole production like an MC would be, I think we need to be there to be engaged, with that. So I think we need to offer up to the meeting planner that as you're planning this event, the meeting planner may put on 1 or 4 or 5 events a year. As a speaker, many of us are speaking at 40 or 50 or some people more events a year. So we bring a lot of knowledge, especially as events are changing. Those of us who have the ability to get out there and see how different people are doing events, we become sort of extra consulting for the client. And, I'm sure some people charge for that, but I just tell the clients, look, I'm happy to jump on as many calls as we need to within reason. I've never had anybody abuse it, but I think that we have to become part of their team for that thing. And this goes back to my thing about not speaking and leaving. There's a percentage, and I haven't scientifically looked at it, but there's a percentage of people who aren't going to go to the microphone and ask a question during your Q&A portion of your keynote, but who would like to talk to the speaker at lunch, during the coffee break, in the hallway. And I think that those people, that's part of their experience. So speakers who speak and leave, there's a certain part of people who want to track down the speaker. Sometimes you see a speaker who sits at the front of the room in a line 25 people long, and they'll stay as long as it takes. I think that's awesome. And so I think that we need to build that in with speakers. I think that meeting planners, if you want your speakers to stay through the day, if you want them at dinner or at the cocktail party, when you're negotiating with them, you tell them that's part of it. I had one meeting planner. She really wanted this one speaker, and he was a bestseller. He wasn't famous. I'm not going to say his name, and you may not know his name, but at the time, it was a pretty big deal and had a best-selling book. And they wanted him to stay and do a book signing at the cocktail party. And he didn't want to do it. And they called me and said, Thom, we really want to do this. And I won't say who his competitor was, but it was another famous economist. And I said, tell them that if he doesn't want to do it, that you're going to call this other economist to see if he'll do it, because the cocktail party was really important to the meeting planner. And she's like, well, we really want this speaker. I'm like, just tell him we really are looking for someone who will stay. And his price tag was $25,000. And she called him and she said, the speech was in the morning. The cocktail party was in the afternoon. So it was a whole day. It became a 2-night thing. And he said, then $50,000. And she said, you know what? I think we can find somebody who can talk on a message about the economy, kind of related to growth, who will stay for dinner. And she ended the conversation. And it was the person and the agent. The agent called back 30 minutes later and said he'll do it. And so if you want something, ask for it and be willing to walk away. And unless you have to have Bill Clinton as your speaker, no matter what, guess what? George W. Bush might be a good speaker. Find somebody else in that area and move on if they won't work with you.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I mean, it sounds like something you and I just throw in, Thom. I often will take my laptop and I will sit in the lobby or outside the meeting room, before or after my speech, and I will just work there, knowing that random people are going to come up to me and ask questions they couldn't ask otherwise. I'm still getting some emails out. I'm still knocking some things out, but it gives that opportunity. And I usually throw that in for free if my schedule permits. But
I think from the relationship with the planner, if the planner wants that, the planner needs to ask for it.
Absolutely.
And be adamant. And I'll tell you what, I don't make $25,000 a speech, but for the nice number I get, I'll kind of do whatever you want. You want me to do a breakout the same day? Okay.
Right.
I would rather work than not. So if you ask me to do something within reason, I have one client who took advantage of that. They had me do like 5 things and it was exhausting. And so now I just tell people, I'll do whatever you want within reason.
Mhm.
And I've never had anybody abuse it since I've added that little verbal tagline.
I think that's important. So,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Deirdre.
And I think, Shawn, you touched on, the agency, and so did you as well, Thom. And it's really important to develop that relationship with the agency that you're dealing with. Because when you tend to use the same agencies, then you have developed those relationships. And you can say, listen, this is what we're looking for from the keynote or from the speaker. And we'd really appreciate if he hung around for like 15 minutes. We'll make sure that he's at the beginning of or the end of a break or the beginning of a break, and that he can you know speak to the audience, because that's what the audience wants. They want to be able to engage with a keynote instead of them rushing in and then rushing out.
And it's becoming really common with hybrid and virtual to then do a Q&A. Like, I'm an interviewer as part of my Master of Ceremonies offering. I've done like 1,000 podcast interviews. So like you guys, I know how to ask questions of a guest. And so that's something I offer is, hey, after the keynote, let me interview the speaker, and the at-home audience can ask questions in chat, and they can do that. And again, you have to let the speaker know we want the Q&A, it might be an hour later, it might be during lunch, but let them know that that's what we expect. And speakers are just going to have to, say yes or not get booked.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So, Thom, it leads to the question, obviously, if meeting planners thinking about who to hire, Thom Singer, but beyond
that would be a good answer.
Beyond hiring Thom Singer, what advice do you have for, trying to find that right person to come speak at your event?
So first of all, if you work with a speakers bureau, that's awesome because that's what they do for a living. So you tell them what you're looking for and you give them all the parameters and you tell them what your budget is. And they're going to be able to either have somebody they've already worked with or turn over a lot of rocks. The other thing is, if you work directly with speakers yourself and you don't go through a bureau, turn to your past speakers who you loved. Let's face it, if you've planned a conference for the last 5 years and you have 2 keynotes a year, you had 10 speakers. Of those 10, 4 of them, you probably were like, wow, I wish every speaker was like those 4. Go back to those people and say, we loved you because of the way you dealt with our audience. We loved you because you stuck around all day. We loved you because whatever, the way you were interactive. And ask them, who else do you know? Most speakers know other speakers. Most speakers tend to watch who else is speaking near them because they want to learn. They want to know who the competition is. A lot of speakers, those of us who are involved in the National Speakers Association, we have speaker friends. And so ask the speakers who you like, who you think are good, who else is like you or who else have you seen? I have dozens of clients who I realize after a keynote, I realize that next year, 2 things are true. They're going to have another conference next year, and they probably don't want the same keynoter. So I tell every client, if I'm not booked through a bureau, I tell every client that they can always call me to help vet ideas. I have about 24 clients who 3 and 4 years later call me and say, Thom, we're looking for someone. Maybe this is the demographic we're looking for. This is the topic we're looking for. Who have you seen? And I just refer people. And so go to the speakers you used to work with and ask them, who do you think would be awesome? Because a speaker won't give you a bad recommendation.
No, it's reputational. And again, a lot of us, we know people, right? You get a feel. People, we gravitate to people with similar personality styles. I'm going to meet with other people that are service oriented. They're going to take good care of their clients, right? I mean, that's who I'm going to hang out with. So generally, somebody asks me for a referral, I look for people with that type of attitude set. Deirdre?
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And the other thing that I think that planners have to look at, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is thematics of your event. What is the theme of your event, and how do you put a keynote or a guest speaker in with that theme? You want to keep it within what your theme is, but also have that person engaging. I mean, I've done a lot of events where the speakers were totally dry, and it's like, okay, can we, how do we engage people when you've got a dry speaker?
Well, and like I built my career after the recession of 2008, 2009, And my topic was human connection. It was your networking. It was your building your brand. It was being engaged. And in 2009, 10, and 11, almost every conference out there, because the recession, people realized how important networking was. Everybody's conference was titled Connections. I got booked a lot because I was the connection guy. And so, I was able to do that. But even if their theme was something different, work with the speaker to make sure they're working that theme in. If the theme is up and away, that's a stupid thing. But if the theme was something that wasn't connections, but that had some meat tied to it, I could work in something in my speech that referenced, that theme, that wasn't just pandering. And so the speaker has to do the work to make sure that they're bringing forth what it is. If everything this year is going to be about rebooting, restarting, fresh start, the speaker had better come with a story of how they fresh started their speaking career.
Yeah, and I think it's nice to make those tie-ins. Thom won't be speaking at the Up and Away conference.
I don't know where that came from. Every now and then things come out of my mouth and I'm like, that was dumb.
And some meeting planners probably planning that right now, and they're like,
well, and if they are, I will wear like a hot air balloon hat for them or something.
That'd be fantastic.
I don't know. It's an old song. It's an old song, right?
Yeah, so. It is.
My beautiful balloon. That tells you how old I am.
It just is, but it's just like, I'm like, I bet there's somebody planning the Up Away conference. Thom just defended him. So Thom,
or they're going to hire me because I'm thinking of Up and Away already.
Exactly. You're already on the wavelength.
There you go. You got a gig. You got a gig, Thom.
So Thom, you're a lot of fun. We've done a couple of these conversations over the years, and I know you're always out there trying to please your clients. How do people learn more about you and get in touch with you, maybe consider you for their next meeting or event?
ThomSinger.com, and that's THOM, like Thomas without the ass. ThomSinger.com. That will link to me. It links to everything that I do, my blog, my podcast, etc.
Folks, pat yourself on the back for doing the hard work. You've been tuned into the Best in Events show. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be back with you with more tips and tricks. We're just trying to bring out the best ideas for events, help connect speakers and events, and bring all the ideas together as we move into this new world. We'd love to see your comments. Reach out to me or Deirdre directly, and we'll be bringing you more content in the near future. So make sure you subscribe to that YouTube channel. We'll catch you all soon. Thanks for tuning in today.